My name is Maren Calloway, and I was 31 years old when my father looked across the dinner table at me and said, with his fork still in his hand, "A teacher. No real career. No degree that counts." He didn't lower his voice. My sister's fiancé was sitting 4 chairs away. I smiled. I picked up my glass of water, and I took a slow sip, and I thought about the manuscript sitting in a drawer in my apartment. The one I'd been writing for 3 years between lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences and summers that everyone assumed I spent doing nothing. I didn't say a word about it. What my father didn't know that evening, what none of them had any reason to suspect, was that the drawer wouldn't stay closed much longer. A conversation I'd been waiting on was about to change the shape of everything, and when it did, the reveal wouldn't come from me. It would come from a small gold sticker on the cover of a book, and my father would be holding it. What happened after that is the part of this story my family still doesn't like to talk about. Welcome back to channel, where quiet people finally let the paperwork do the shouting. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. New stories go up every week. And if something in this one lands, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. I grew up in a family that measured success in credentials you could frame and hang on a wall. My father, Gerald Calloway, had a law degree from a school he mentioned in roughly 1 out of every 3 conversations. Not the rank of the school, the name of it, the weight of it, the way it sounded when a room went quiet after. He'd built a mid-size real estate law practice in Asheville, North Carolina, and for as long as I could remember, the Calloway name in our part of town meant something specific: education, position, the right kind of accomplishment. The kind that came with a title, you could say, at a party. My mother, Sandra, had a graduate degree in art history. She'd worked at a gallery in Charlotte in her 20s, which she described as her professional years, a phrase that implied everything after had been a different, lesser category of living. She'd stopped working when my sister Vivian was born and hadn't gone back, but the credentials remained. They were like furniture in the house. Always there. Always visible. Proof that the Calloways were not the kind of family that let things slide. Vivian was 2 years younger than me and had, from roughly the age of 15, performed the role of the daughter my parents had in mind. She had a business degree from UNC. She worked in brand consulting in Raleigh. She wore blazers to family dinners and spoke in the cadence of someone who'd recently attended a workshop on communication. My parents adored her in the specific, uncomplicated way that people adore things that confirm what they already believe about themselves. And then there was me. I had a bachelor's degree in English from Appalachian State, a school my father referred to, without apparent irony, as the mountain school, the way you describe a campground. I had a teaching certification. I had a position at Ridgeline Middle School in a small town called Clover Creek, 40 minutes east of Asheville, where I taught 7th grade English and ran an after-school writing club for 12-year-olds who needed somewhere quiet to go at the end of the day. I loved my job in the particular way that people love things they weren't supposed to choose. Not with noise. Not with the kind of enthusiasm that needs an audience. Quietly. Steadily. The way you love a room you've made your own. I loved the moment a kid who'd told you 3 weeks earlier that they hated reading handed you a story they'd written at 2 in the morning because they couldn't stop. I loved the silence in the classroom when a paragraph landed and 23 12-year-olds went still all at once, the way a room does when something true has been said out loud. I loved the particular small weight of a composition notebook. I loved the smell of a classroom on the first day of September. My parents did not love my job. Or rather, they had made their peace with it the way you make peace with a piece of furniture you've stopped noticing. It was there. It was mine. It wasn't worth fighting about anymore, but it also wasn't worth celebrating, and it was never, under any circumstances, to be presented as an achievement. My father's position on the matter had been established early and had never materially changed. When I told him, my senior year of high school, that I wanted to study English and go into teaching, he looked at me across his desk. He always had these conversations across his desk, which in retrospect said everything, and said, "That's a fine hobby, Maren. What are you going to do for work?" I'd said it again. Teaching. English. 7th grade, maybe. Middle school. He'd been quiet for a moment. Then, "You understand that I can't tell people my daughter is a schoolteacher and have them take me seriously." I was 17. I didn't know yet that this sentence would follow me for the next 14 years like a tax on every meal we ate together. My anchor, through all of it, was my grandmother on my mother's side, Nora Fisk, who had lived in a yellow craftsman house in Weaverville for as long as I'd been alive, and who had understood me, I think, from the first time she caught me reading under the table at a family dinner at age 8 instead of listening to my father talk about case law. Nora had been a librarian. 41 years. She'd retired at 67 and spent the decade after that reading everything she told herself she'd get to someday, and growing tomatoes, and corresponding by actual handwritten letter with a network of former colleagues across 4 states who shared her view that a well-organized library was among the highest forms of public service a person could perform. She was not a sentimental woman. She did not offer comfort in the form of reassurance or soft words. What she offered was sharper than that. She took you seriously. She asked what you were working on, and then listened to the answer with the focused attention of someone who expected to be interested, and usually was. When I told her, the spring of my first year at Appalachian State, that I was thinking about teaching, that I'd been sitting with the idea for months, and had decided that it was the right thing, she nodded once, the way she always did when something confirmed what she'd already suspected. "You'll be good at it," she said. "The ones who are good at it don't go into it for the salary." I laughed. "I know," I said. "Your father will have a reaction," she said. Not unkindly, just factually the way she said most things. He already did. She nodded again. She poured us both tea, which meant the conversation was going to continue. "There's a thing some people do," she said, "when they've made a choice that worked for them. They take that choice and they hold it up like it's a measurement. And then they measure everyone around them against it for the rest of their lives. Your father's very good at this." I said nothing. "The best answer," she said, "is to just do the work. Not for him, for the work." That conversation was in March of my freshman year. I thought about it more times than I could count over the next 12 years. The writing started the way most things I've ever done started, quietly, without announcement, without a plan that anyone would have recognized as a plan. It was my 3rd year of teaching. My writing club had grown from 4 students to 17, which meant we'd outgrown the corner of my classroom we'd been using and moved into the school library 2 afternoons a week. The librarian there, a woman named Donna Price who had worked at Ridgeline for 22 years and had the organizational instincts of someone who'd been waging a long and mostly successful war against entropy, had started leaving books on my desk. Not with notes. Just the books. Placed there when I arrived in the morning, with whatever bookmark she'd last used still inside. I asked her once why. She said, "Because you need to read more of what you're trying to teach." She wasn't wrong. The reading started filling something in. And then one night in October, late, sitting at the small desk in my apartment with my lesson plans finished and nothing particular needing doing, I opened a new document on my laptop and started writing something that wasn't a lesson plan and wasn't a grade comment and wasn't a note to a parent. It was the first page of something I couldn't yet name. I didn't tell anyone. Not Donna. Not my grandmother. Not the friend from college I called every Sunday evening. I wrote the way I ran my writing club, slowly, patiently, without expecting the shape of it to be visible until it was. By the end of that school year, I had 80 pages. By the following summer, I had a complete draft. It was a novel, not autobiographical, not a roman à clef, not a thinly veiled anything. It was a story about a woman in a small mountain town in the 1950s who becomes the town's first female notary and spends the next 40 years quietly doing things the men around her insist can't be done. I'd chosen the period because I wanted the distance. I'd chosen the setting because I knew those hills. I revised it through the following fall and winter. I found a writing group, 3 other people, all adults, meeting on Tuesday evenings in a back room at a bookshop in Asheville, and brought the first 50 pages in February, fully prepared to be told it wasn't working. They told me it was working. I revised it again.
I recerca agents.
I sent out 22 query letters in late spring, fully prepared for this to take years, because I'd read enough about publishing to know that it took years, and I was in no hurry, and I was not building this for an audience. I was building it for the same reason I'd started it, because the work called for it. I heard back from an agent in 6 weeks. Her name was Patricia, And she was thorough and direct, and had the polished, practical manner of someone who'd spent 2 decades making things happen inside a system that ran on patience. She offered representation in August. We revised together through the fall. She submitted to publishers in January. I told no one in my family. This is the part people always find the hardest to understand. Why I didn't say anything. The answer is not complicated. I already knew what the response would be. Not cruelty. Not dismissal. Something more corrosive than either. The carefully managed enthusiasm of people who didn't believe it would come to anything but couldn't say so outright. The encouraging nod that means good for you, but I'd sat across from that nod for 31 years, and I was not interested in sitting across from it again. If it came to nothing, I'd lose nothing. If it came to something, I'd know before they did. In March, Patricia called on a Wednesday morning, which she always did when there was news, and told me we had an offer. I sat in my car in the school parking lot for 11 minutes after the call ended, watching a group of 7th graders play a game I didn't know the rules to, and felt something loosen in my chest that had been there so long I'd stopped noticing the weight of it. I called my grandmother that evening. She said, "I know." I said, "You couldn't have known." She said, "No. But I knew it was coming." Tell me the story. My sister Vivian got engaged in September. His name was Daniel Holt. He worked in commercial real estate, which, in my father's taxonomy of legitimate professions, ranked somewhere just below law and finance and just above everything else, and he had the comfortable, forward-leaning confidence of a man who'd never had a room question whether he belonged in it. I didn't dislike him. He was fine. He was exactly the kind of person Vivian had always been expected to end up with, and he knew it, and so did she, and so did my parents, and the whole situation had the feeling of something that had been arranged by forces larger than any individual involved. The engagement dinner was held at my parents' house on a Saturday evening in late October. My mother had spent 3 days on the food. My father had brought up 2 bottles from a case he'd been saving for what he called a consequential occasion, which told you everything about how he ranked events. There were 12 people at the table: my parents, me, Vivian, and Daniel, Daniel's parents, Roger and Christine Holt, who ran a construction company and conducted themselves with the specific, quiet authority of people who knew exactly how much they were worth, and a collection of aunts, uncles, and family friends who'd been invited, I suspected, as witnesses to a particular kind of social confirmation. I'd driven up from Clover Creek that morning. I'd brought a bottle of wine and a card, and I'd sat in the car outside my parents' house for 2 minutes before going in, which was a habit I'd developed somewhere in my late 20s as a way of arriving at Callaway family events in a state of equilibrium rather than a state of anticipatory fatigue. Dinner went the way these things went. My mother orbited the table, filling glasses, redirecting conversations, deploying the particular social management she'd spent decades perfecting. My father held court at the head, which was its own performance. Questions about Daniel's professional prospects, anecdotes from his own early career, the careful steering of conversation toward topics where his expertise could be made visible. I sat between my Aunt Kathleen and Daniel's mother Christine and talked, mostly, about Christine's garden in Hendersonville and a restoration project she'd been following at the Botanical Conservatory there. Christine was the kind of person who asked follow-up questions and remembered what you'd said, and the conversation was, by Callaway family dinner standards, a genuine pleasure. The trouble started, as it often did, with a question that sounded like conversation but was actually architecture. It was Roger Holt who asked, and I believe he asked in good faith. He was working his way around the table in the systematic way of someone who was genuinely interested in the people seated at it, and he turned to me and said, "Maren, what is it you do?" "I teach," I said. 7th grade English, at a middle school in Clover Creek." "That's great," he said. And he meant it. My father looked up from his plate. He didn't say anything immediately. That was its own language. I knew it the way you know a weather pattern, the pause before, the particular quality of silence. Then Roger said something about his nephew, who'd done some teaching before going into business, and how he'd always thought it was harder than people gave it credit for. And my father said, conversationally, the way you'd mention the traffic. "Teaching is a fine thing to do while you're figuring out your direction." Christine Holt looked at him. Roger looked at him. I looked at my wine glass. Vivian, to her credit, made a small noise that was somewhere between a cough and a redirect. Daniel said something about the Brussels sprouts. My Aunt Kathleen, who had been married to my father's brother for 31 years and had heard every variation of this performance, picked up her fork with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing not to say anything. And then my father, warming to it now, the way he always did when a room failed to push back. No real ladder to it, of course. Maren's always been, well, she's good with children. But no degree that advances you anywhere, no trajectory in the professional sense. She's found what suits her. He said it without malice. That was always the thing. He genuinely believed he was offering an accurate description of my life rather than a diminishment of it. This was, I'd come to understand, its own particular kind of damage, the harm that doesn't know it's harm, delivered in the tone of reasonable observation. I looked up from my glass and smiled. "The food's wonderful, Mom," I said. My mother smiled back, grateful for the pivot, and the conversation moved. But Roger Holt had been watching me during my father's little speech, and after the table had shifted to other topics and the second bottle had been opened, he leaned toward me and said quietly, "For what it's worth, my sister taught high school biology for 28 years, and I think she did more good than half the people I've worked with." I thanked him, genuinely. Later, in the kitchen, helping my mother with the plates, she said, not unkindly, not as a weapon, just as information, the way she communicated most things, "Your father just gets nervous when he doesn't know how to talk about what you do, Maren. He doesn't mean it badly." I was 31 years old, and I had been hearing the sentence, in various forms, for 14 years. "I know," I said. I drove home in the dark with the radio off. I was not angry. I was something quieter than angry, something more like a long, slow exhale. The kind of feeling that comes not from a new wound, but from the patient accumulation of old ones finally reaching some unannounced threshold. I had a book. It had a publisher. My agent had called 2 weeks earlier to confirm the release date and the first print run, and the fact that a regional library system had already submitted a standing order because someone on the acquisitions committee had read an advance copy and flagged it for the whole network. I had not told my father. I drove home thinking about the particular freedom of knowing something no one at that table knew. It wasn't vindication, not yet.
It was something more private than that.
It was the knowledge that the story wasn't finished, and that when it ended, the ending would not belong to him. The book came out the following October. The title was The Notary of Craven Branch, and the cover was a painting of a mountain valley in autumn, the kind of painting that looked like it belonged somewhere specific, which it did. I'd found it in the archives of a county historical society 3 counties east of Asheville, and the artist had been dead for 60 years, and the rights had cost exactly nothing. Patricia had done her work well. There was a review in a regional literary journal. There was a write-up in the Asheville paper, a real one, not a calendar listing, but a feature with a photograph in the art section. There were 37 advanced reader reviews on Goodreads, of which 29 were 4 or 5 stars. There was a reading at a bookshop in downtown Asheville in October, which sold out its 40-seat capacity and turned away 11 people at the door. My grandmother came to the reading. She sat in the front row, which was not her preference. She was not a front row person, but she sat there anyway, and when I looked up from the page at the beginning of the 3rd excerpt, she was watching me with the expression she'd worn the night I'd called her with the offer. Not pride, exactly. Something more settled than pride. The look of someone whose long-held conviction has been confirmed. I did not invite my parents. I did not tell them the book was out. This is the part that requires explanation, and I want to give it honestly. It was not a strategic decision. I was not building toward a reveal. I had long since stopped expecting my father's opinion of my choices to change, and I was not holding my breath for a moment of reckoning. I simply didn't want to watch him navigate his response to the book the way I'd watched him navigate his response to everything else. The careful reframing, the qualified acknowledgement, the faint surprise that something I'd done had turned out to be real. I wanted the book to exist on its own terms. I wanted it to live in the world, without the particular weight of his reaction attached to it. What I did not anticipate was the regional library system. My grandmother called me on a Friday morning in November, 6 weeks after the book came out. She sounded exactly like herself, unhurried, matter-of-fact, but there was something underneath the tone that I'd learned to hear over the years, a slight precision in her word choice that meant she was being careful. She said, "I think you should know that your book is in the Weaverville branch." Weaverville.
Her town.
The branch where she'd worked for 22 years before transferring to Asheville in her later career. The branch where my father had taken me as a child, where I'd gotten my first library card at age 6, where the librarian at the desk had known my grandmother's name and mine by extension. "I know," I said. "The acquisitions order." "Maren," she said. "Your parents checked out a copy." I was quiet. "They didn't recognize the name on the cover when they checked it out," she said. "The librarian, this is Janet Bowman. She's been there 12 years. She knows your family. Janet said your mother picked it up from the new arrivals display because she liked the cover painting." I sat down at my kitchen table. "They checked it out," I said. "Yesterday," my grandmother said. "Janet called me because she wasn't sure what to do, and she thought I should know." I thought about the painting on the cover. I thought about my mother standing at the new arrivals display, picking up a book because she liked the Autumn Valley because she had a degree in art history and had always been drawn to a certain kind of landscape image. I thought about the spine. "Maren Calloway," I said. "She hasn't called me." "No," my grandmother said. "So she either hasn't opened it yet," I said, "or she has opened it and she's trying to figure out what to say." My grandmother was quiet for a moment. Then, "Janet mentioned that when your mother brought it to the desk, she was already holding the back cover. The author photo is on the back cover." I said nothing. "Your father was parking the car," my grandmother said. "Janet said your mother's face." She stopped. "I'll let Janet tell you what she saw. But Maren, when your father came in from the parking lot, when he walked up to the desk, your mother handed him the book?" She stopped again. "Janet said he stood there for a long time," my grandmother said. "Holding it, not saying anything. His face just went." I sat at my kitchen table for a while after we hung up, looking at the window, at the late November light coming in flat and gold and indifferent across the floor. I made coffee. I graded 4 papers. I texted my friend Lori that something had happened that I'd tell her about when I could find the words for it. My phone did not ring that evening. It did not ring the following morning. My parents had been standing at a library desk 40 minutes from my apartment, holding a book with my name on the spine and my face on the back cover, a book that had been checked out by 37 library card holders in 6 weeks, a book with a bestseller sticker from an independent bookseller association on the front cover, a book with a review in the newspaper they read every Sunday morning, and my phone did not ring. 2 days later, it did. My father called on a Sunday afternoon. I let it ring twice. Not because I was deciding whether to answer, I had already decided, but because I wanted to be standing somewhere steady when I picked up. I was in the kitchen. I was wearing an old cardigan. I was as far from this conversation as I could make myself feel, which was, I discovered, the most useful posture for having it. "Maren," he said. A pause. I knew this pause. It was the pause of someone who'd prepared a version of something and then, at the moment of delivery, was no longer sure the version would hold. "Your mother and I were at the library," he said. "I heard," I said. Another pause. Shorter this time. "The book," he said. We didn't know." "No," I said. "How long?" he said. I thought about the October night in my apartment 3 years earlier. The lesson plans finished. The blank document. The first sentence. 3 years, I said. The sound he made was not quite silence and not quite speech. It was the sound of a person recalibrating not just an opinion but a whole architecture, the one he'd been building and maintaining and polishing for 20 years, the one in which my choices were decorative and his were structural. "The review," he said. He meant the Asheville paper. "We read it last month." "We didn't. You didn't know it was me." "No." I waited. "We brought it home," he said. "We've been reading it. Together. Your mother reads it out loud in the evenings." He stopped. "She's very good at it. At reading out loud. You probably remember that." I did remember that. My mother reading to us on winter evenings when Vivian and I were small. Her voice finding the shape of a sentence the way a musician finds a key, naturally, without announcement. "I remember," I said. "Maren." Another pause. "The longest one. The librarian. Janet. She told us, she said it was in the whole regional network. That it had been selected. That there was a standing order." "Yes," I said. "How many branches?" 22, I said. He was quiet. This is the moment I want to describe as precisely as I can, because it was not what I had expected, and in its unexpectedness, it was more disorienting than anything theatrical would have been. He did not apologize. Not directly, not yet. What he did was say my name again, Maren, in a register I had not heard from him before, not in 31 years of this specific relationship. Not the tone of the desk. Not the tone of the dinner table. Something underneath both of those. Something that had the quality of a room you've been standing outside for a long time and have finally walked into. I've been, he said, and then he stopped and tried again. I've said things over the years. About your work. He stopped again. I want to tell you that I'm reading it. That we're reading it. And that it's very good, Maren. It's genuinely. His voice did something that I had no previous data point for. It's the best thing I've read in years. I stood in my kitchen in my old cardigan in the November light, and I held the phone against my ear, and I felt something in my chest shift, not dramatically, not like a door thrown open, but like the slow settling of a house after a long winter, things finding their level after sustained pressure. Thank you, Dad, I said. I meant it. The author photo, he said. You look like your grandmother. That one I hadn't expected. She was at the reading, I said. She sat in the front row. She knew, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. A long pause. And then, quietly, I would have come. If you'd. I know, I said. And I stopped him there, not unkindly, because what I needed him to understand was not that I had done this in spite of him, but that I had done it entirely without him, and that the doing had been, in its way, complete. We talked for another 20 minutes. He asked about the publisher. He asked about Patricia. He asked whether there would be another book, and I told him there would. I was already 3 chapters into the second one, and he made a sound that I could only interpret as pride, uncomplicated and genuine, and about 15 years overdue. When we hung up, I stood at the kitchen window for a while. Then I made lunch. I called my grandmother and left a voicemail telling her that the call had happened and that she was right, she was always right, and that I was fine. I did not call Vivian. That conversation would come on its own time. The cascade, when it came, was quieter than I'd imagined and more lasting than I'd expected. My father called Roger Holt the following week. I know this because Roger called me unprompted, genuinely, to say that he'd had a conversation with my father and wanted to offer his congratulations, and that if I ever wanted to do an author event at the Botanical Conservatory in Hendersonville, Christine sat on their programming board and they'd be delighted to have me. I thanked him and told him I'd hold on to that offer. He said, "Your father sounded different on the phone." I don't know how to put it. Just different. I knew how to put it. My Aunt Kathleen, the one who'd picked up her fork at the engagement dinner with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing not to say anything, called me in December to say she'd found the book at her local branch and had read it in 2 sittings and had cried at the ending, which she said she was telling me because she was not a person who cried at books, and she thought I should know. She also mentioned, in passing, that my father had brought it up at Thanksgiving. Unprompted. In a room full of people. My daughter's novel, he had said. She repeated the phrase carefully, the way you repeat something you want to make sure the other person hears precisely. My daughter's novel. Vivian called in January. This was the most complicated call because Vivian and I had a complicated history, not hostile, not estranged, but freighted with the particular weight of 2 people who'd been positioned as opposites from childhood and had spent most of their adult lives navigating the space between what that positioning required and what they actually were. She said, "I didn't know." "I know," I said. "You could have told me." "I know," I said again. I wasn't ready to. A pause. Then, "I've been thinking about that dinner. With Roger and Christine. What Dad said." "Vivian." "I didn't say anything," she said. "I should have said something." This was not a small thing for her to say. I knew it, and I let it land. "You made a sound," I said. "That's not enough." "No," I said. "It wasn't." Another pause. "It's a really good book," she said. "Daniel read it first, and then I read it, and he keeps asking me if you're working on another one, because apparently he liked it more than he told me, which I find offensive but also very telling." I laughed. It surprised me, the laugh and how real it was. There's another one coming, I said. It'll be out in about 2 years. Will you tell us this time? I thought about it. I'll tell you when there's something to tell, I said. That's probably the best I can do. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that's fair. The moment I keep coming back to, the one that crystallized everything, happened in February for months after the library visit. My father called on a Sunday morning, which was not unusual by then. We'd been talking more regularly since November, finding a new frequency, cautious on both sides but genuine. He said, "The reading in March. At the bookshop on Lexington. Your grandmother sent me the calendar listing." She did, I said. Of course she had. Is it all right if we come? I was standing at my kitchen window. The February light outside was thin and gray, and the bare trees in the yard were perfectly still. Yes, I said. It's all right. We'll sit wherever there's room, he said. We won't. We're not looking to make a thing of it, Maren. I know, Dad. He paused. Then, should I tell your aunt? She'd want to come. Yes, I said. Tell Kathleen. There were 63 people at the March reading. It was a bigger venue than October. The bookshop had moved the event to their event room after the first one sold out and created a waitlist. My grandmother sat in the 4th row, not the front this time, making room for someone else. My Aunt Kathleen was 2 seats to her left. My parents sat in the 7th row, together, my father with his hands folded in his lap, my mother with a copy of the book open on her knees. I stood at the podium and looked out at the room and took a breath. I did not look at my father when I began to read. But when I looked up at the end of the second excerpt, when I looked up to take a breath and find my place in the room, I found him. He was watching me with the careful, focused attention of someone who wanted to understand something and was trying to do the work of it. I looked away. I found my place on the page. I kept reading. The thing about being written off is that it shows you exactly how much room you have to work in. People who've already decided you won't amount to anything stop watching. And when they stop watching, you're free. That's my story. A composition notebook, a first draft in a desk drawer, and 22 library branches. When my father asked if it was all right for them to come to the reading, when he said we'll sit wherever there's room, I said yes. Some people have told me they would have said no. That the years of being dismissed had earned me the right to close that door. I want to ask you this. If the person who'd written you off for 14 years finally asked permission to come to the moment they'd been too small to believe in, would you let them in? Drop your answer in the comments. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.